Welcome to the Stumbling Forward podcast. Progress isn't always linear, and it's rarely perfect, but it gets us where we need to be. I'm your host, Erika Taylor-Beck, the founder of Authentic Foundations, a business dedicated to creating online courses and one-on-one coaching to improve the way that we view and do leadership. Hello, and welcome back to Stumbling Forward. I am very excited today to have my guest, Dr. Ashley Rodriguez. She is a psychologist and the founder of PathBreak Coaching and Consulting. And today we are going to be talking about generational trauma, which oddly enough, I'm actually very excited about. So Ashley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about you? I know I just kind of gave a very brief intro, but tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. So I'm a licensed psychologist and coach. In my private practice, I see individuals navigating life transitions. And in my coaching, I offer digital products, including toolkits and coaching programs to increase access to healing.
I love it. Did see you sent me an email this past week, and I think the information that you sent was really insightful and really helpful for people who maybe don't know much about generational trauma or what it is or how to define it. So before we dive in, can you explain a little bit about what generational trauma is?
Yeah, generational trauma is basically the passing down of unresolved pain and coping strategies. And at one point, for the generation that experienced the trauma, it was adaptive. It helps them survive the traumatic experience. And the hard part is that then those behaviors, those beliefs are passed down to generations that are in a completely different situation. And so then those beliefs, those strategies aren't as helpful for the next generation.
Okay, excellent. And if people are listening to this, it's probably like, maybe that's me. And I would venture to guess that most people are dealing with some type of generational trauma just from the past and what previous generations have been through and how, like you said, times were then. The coping strategies that were used in the past, as you mentioned, they were helpful at the time, they were coping, they were protective measures, but they don't necessarily apply to today and even to future generations that are coming. And the the guide that you had sent through the email, as I was reading it, it's like, oh, I didn't realize that that might have been a sign or a symptom of generational trauma. So I think what can be really helpful is to talk a little bit about what it might look like. Because again, if someone's not really familiar with it, they're like, well, maybe it's not me. I don't think I have that. But it's things along the lines of we don't talk about our problems. We always put on a happy face when we're in public. We put on a strong, united front, family first before everything else. And those things that you do to try to keep this public appearance, but you never actually address the root of the problem and you pacify it for generations. And then you teach the next generation how to just stuff everything down because that's just what we do. And to you, it's very normal because that's your family. That's just what you grow up in, and you assume everyone else is doing that until you see other families. Or as you and I mentioned, as you start seeing on the internet, people posting different experiences, and you think, maybe this wasn't normal. Maybe this wasn't healthy or okay.
Yeah, and the difficult part, I always like to acknowledge that for the generation that did experience the trauma, when you're in survival mode, there isn't space for reflection and for feeling. You're in go 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 mode because literally your life is on the line. And so that generation doesn't have the time or space to really think through like the horrible things that they experienced and what does that mean. And so when they're parenting or when they're working with the next generation, they don't have that experience. And so you go generation to generation to generation, and now people don't know how to have healthy conversations or healthy dispute. Conflict is natural. It's part of relationships, it's part of being close and connected to other people. But what happens when you've never learned how to disagree with someone without it being a huge conflict or without people completely, throwing it under the rug and avoiding it? So it's all those small things that we may not realize that actually that's from intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something that you carry into your other relationships. So if you're in a romantic relationship, the way that you cope with your disputes and your conflict, because as you mentioned, it's normal, it's healthy. You should have some type of conflict, but you should be able to resolve it in a way that is, healthy and mature. But if you find yourself avoiding those conversations and the way that your family quote unquote fights and the way that their family fights, they don't always mesh because it's just, again, it's what you've learned. And so if you're someone who doesn't like conflict and you stuff it down and want to ignore it and they want to address it head on, that's going to cause some tension in your other relationships. And that's where some of this generational trauma can come up because you might not ever really notice it or experience it because again, this is just how our family is. This is what we do until you run into a different type of relationship that forces you to confront your limiting beliefs. And then you think, "Oh shoot, now I've got to deal with this." And then you try to go back to maybe your parents or your siblings or your grandparents to address, and as you mentioned, it's not always well received because they don't always want to hear it or focus on it because maybe they don't realize it's something. They don't want to take quote unquote blame for it, even though it's not really blame, but you got to kind of call it out or call it in to say, let's address it. But it's painful and it's uncomfortable. And so, how do you help people who are trying to go back to their families to work on this or at least address it and they're being received with rejection and silence?
I think that's one of the hardest parts of what I do because a lot of times the individuals I work with are the ones that are breaking the cycles. They're the ones that want to reflect and want to change and want to do things differently, and their families may not be ready. And so I think a big part of healing work in general is knowing that everybody's in a different place and coming to terms with that, that it isn't your role or your responsibility to help that person because really it's all about timing and where that person is in their journey. So a lot of the work that I do with individuals is if you're going to open that conversation, one, let's prepare for all the possibilities because it's very likely you're not going to get the response that you want. And that doesn't mean anything about you and where you are in your journey. That is about that person and where they are in their journey. I think it's also about checking in with the person before going into the conversation. I've been thinking about X, Y, and Z from my childhood. I really wanted to have a conversation with you. I'm wondering if you are open to that. Because if somebody gets really defensive or, starts teasing you or whatever it is, right there, they're not ready. It's not the time, it's not the place, and let's not even go into it. So I think there are some strategies like that, but I always believe in preparing in advance and coping in advance to prepare someone for all of the possibilities. You never know. Somebody might be ready and may surprise you and say, I've actually been thinking about that too. Great. Now we're in a place where we can have a conversation. But if they aren't, it's just going to cause heartache. So I do a lot of preparation in advance.
No, that's a good point. I have two thoughts from there, two questions. So the first one is how, if you are going to address this with, again, a parent or someone, and how do you bring it up in a way that isn't necessarily blaming? Because if you say, I'm thinking about my childhood and I have some things I want to talk about, how do you bring it up where they don't immediately go on the defensive, where it's also bringing them into the healing process and not necessarily pointing fingers and blaming them for something?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that you can do. One, just like you said, having that curiosity approach instead of that blaming approach. I like to teach clients how to use I statements because I statements help us get our wants and needs met in a lot of ways. Sometimes somebody's going to get defensive regardless, and that's okay. But they increase our chances of getting our point across in a way that doesn't blame the other person. So I felt insert feeling when you insert action, and then sometimes giving an alternative. Next time I would prefer insert whatever it is. I also believe in sandwiching. So validating and saying, I imagine it was really challenging, or I wonder what else was going on for you at that time. And I'm not judging you. Sometimes just naming it, I'm not judging you. I'm curious. I've been thinking about it. I want to think about it together. I want your perspective. And then going into the hurtful parts. If you go straight into when you did X, Y, and Z, the other person's going to be like defensive because they want to protect themselves. So instead of that, just sandwiching and being curious and being open, I think will increase your chances of a effective and healthy conversation.
Oh, that's really good advice. Thank you. The other question was, even if you bring it up in a way like that, where it's not accusatory, and you just know that they're not ready right now for whatever reason, they're not open to it, shouldn't hinder your healing and your progress. So, what can you do as an individual that if your parent or your family is not open to talking about it, how do you still keep moving in the right direction, even if you're getting no support?
I think sometimes the misconception is that you need the accountability from the other person to heal, and that's not true. And in some situations, I work with clients where The parent may be deceased, may not even be alive to have the conversation. Or parents that, again, just are not ready, are not going to go there. And there's a different grieving process for somebody that is alive, but you just don't have the relationship that you want. So there are different practices you can do. I love writing letters, and not to give it to the person, just putting all your thoughts and feelings, all of your wishes, all of the, things that were hurtful onto the page is so helpful. There's something about taking things from your head to paper that helps with the weight of the thoughts, I find. So writing letters, you can choose to give it. And some clients decide, maybe I'll do a really raw letter, and then maybe I'll do a revised letter, and I'll give the revised letter. And then what that person does with that revised letter, they may respond, they may never bring it up, they may never open it. But you give them the invitation. It's like the ball is in their court in a way. This is how I feel, and what they do with that is what they do with that is helpful. And then also sometimes role play in therapy. I'm your parent. What do you want to tell me? There's something just about like getting it out and saying it out loud and naming it that I think also can help the process, not necessarily in the same way as having a reciprocal conversation with the person, but there is still some healing effects to that.
That makes a lot of sense. So I've gone down the letter path before, and I love what you said, the accountability. You don't really need that. It's great if you get it. It's wonderful if you get it and that you can both move forward in the same direction together. If you don't get the response that you want, or I guess even if you do, maybe if you both are in alignment, this happened, wasn't the best way for us to deal with it. Let's, acknowledge it, but you want to move forward and create new ways of doing things. I don't want to do how we've always done it. That's not working. That's not the right way. I'm going to either parent in a different way, or even if you don't have kids, I'm going to heal and deal with these things in my own way. And what if they don't want to move forward with you? They say, you know what, like I acknowledge that this did happen. This wasn't the best, could have done better, but I'm so set in my ways now. I'm not going to change, basically. If you want to, go ahead, but I'm still going to be and do the way I've always been. How do you advise folks in those situations where they know that they're not doing the right thing, but they're not willing to change it? How do you cope with that?
Part of it, I think, is accepting where they are. So that person is stuck or overwhelmed with the idea of change. Maybe they feel they don't know what that would look like, what that would require of them. They don't have the support. They're not open to the support, whatever it may be. So accepting that, okay, we had this conversation and this is the extent of where they're going to go in their healing journey with me, and that's on them. I think sometimes when trauma is relational, it's so tricky because you want to heal with the person, but that person is responsible for themselves. And we are responsible for ourselves. So that reminder of this is the most that I'm going to get from this person at this time. And things change. I truly believe people can change. I wouldn't do this work if I didn't believe that, but this is where they are. And I think also it's helpful to have sympathy for someone. So it doesn't mean that you agree. To validate doesn't mean you agree, but to understand that for this person that it's just not in the cards for them. They don't have the strategy, they don't have the patience, whatever it may be, and that's okay. I think helps a little bit in feeling less responsible in a way or less hurt by their actions.
Okay. Now, in a situation where maybe you have multiple siblings and a larger family, and as you mentioned, the folks that are working with you typically are cycle breakers. They're recognizing the patterns, they want to change things, but they're the only one. And so maybe the siblings acknowledge, like, yes, that this is what's going on, this is what we agree on, and we share this reality. But again, they aren't really willing to change or to challenge status quo because they don't want to disrupt the balance. Because again, we don't talk about this. We're not going to disrupt the apple cart. So we agree with you. We know that this is a problem, but we're not going to do anything different. And you're the black sheep essentially, because you've got everybody all on the same page, and you're the one that's wanting to change things. How do you handle being the outsider? Because you want to connect, you want to be part of the family, but you want to do it in a different way, in what might be a healthier way. But you're the only one who sees that. So now you look like the problem?
I work with a lot of individuals that are the black sheep of their family, and a lot of times they are called the problem, or they're called, in some ways, they end up with this identity of being the issue because they're bringing up all the issues for the family. And in those situations, if somebody still wants to be connected, I think it's a matter of thinking about in what ways feels good, for how long, and then let's really protect your peace. So, really going into boundaries. If you want to go to that family vacation, are there times that you can separate and take care of yourself and recharge from the harm that is going to be done at some point in being in connection with your family, while also enjoying the times that go well? I had a client that was the only daughter. So I think there is something particular when it comes to gender and to sibling rank, who's the oldest, who's the youngest. Parents are never the same parent for different siblings because our relationships are different. So there's always something unique, or their life circumstances different from when they were first time parents to the second time, so on and so forth. Anyways, I worked with this client about, if you're going to call mom, how long are you going to be on the phone? And how do we get you off the phone once it's too triggering or it's too much? What are these small things that you can do? These are tools in your toolbox to pull out when you need to get yourself out of the situation while still being in relation to your family members. So there are things like that, but that's where also self-validation really comes in, because when they use those strategies, they probably are going to be called the problem, or the family member is going to have a reaction to them. And that's where it's so important that you know how to validate yourself. I feel this way because of this, and that makes sense.
Okay. So I love that piece about the self-validation because like you said earlier, the accountability and things, you can't always force it on other people. So how do you move forward? How do you self-validate? If everyone around you is telling you that you're wrong or that you're the problem, how do you say, no, I'm right, but here are the boundaries I'm setting and I'm going to keep moving forward. I love them, but here's what I need to do for me. How do you do that?
A lot of times, people that are like the cycle breaker, they're the ones that are strong for everyone. They're the ones that take in a lot of the pain. And so I really believe in dialectical thinking. This is a practice from DBT where two things can be true at the same time. So, sort of like the sentence you said, instead of but, I would put and. Both things can be true and both things hold the same weight. So, my family members are feeling X, Y, and Z, and I'm feeling X, Y, and Z. Both things can be true. One is not right or wrong, they're just different. So, that kind of strategy helps. And I think also with boundaries, whenever I do boundary work, I also talk about the person's reaction to it. Let's prepare in advance. They're not going to be happy about it. People have benefited from you not having boundaries. And this is new. This is new for you. This is new for them. So they're going to have a reaction to it. And that actually means you really needed that boundary. If anything, that's more evidence that you needed to take that action. So again, coping in advance, people may make fun of you, people may be upset with you. And actually, that means that you were on the right track that was needed.
Yeah, I laugh because boundaries are really hard,
They're
especially
hard.
with family. I talk about boundaries in the workplace and leadership and different settings, and that's hard enough. But for some reason, when it comes to family, maybe this isn't everybody's family, but family should come first, and family is the priority, and that, like that's your mom, that's your dad. How do you say no to that? And so how do you say no to that? How do you help people create those boundaries because they are scary to feel like you are challenging, or maybe even disobeying. It might be a strong word, but I think maybe accurate for some people to disobey your family or your parents by setting these boundaries.
Yeah, it's not for the weak. And a lot of it is also then working on those beliefs, right? That family comes first, or children should not be hurt, or all of those like narratives that you hear growing up that we internalize because we hear it time and time again, explicitly and implicitly. So it's then how can we reframe some of those beliefs, right? Family is important and I'm also important. How do we just move the narrative a little bit to also put ourselves in the narrative? I think is really helpful. And also, I get this all the time with clients that are thinking about or maybe already decided to go no contact with their parents or with family members. And there's so much shame that comes with that. And people have really strong reactions like, you only get one mom and you only get one dad. But it takes so much for somebody to get to that point to decide to go no contact. I think a lot of times that's really when that narrative work is needed of what does it mean to decide who I'm in connection with and who I'm not. What does it mean to be in connection with a parent? What does a parent symbolize to you? Because a lot of times we're taught that parent knows everything. The saying mom knows best. But in reality, and parents are wise, like the elders are wise and they make mistakes and they're human. And so also sometimes taking a parent off of that pedestal of they aren't perfect. There's no way for them to be perfect can also be helpful when you're then deciding to assert yourself and assert your boundaries with.
Yeah, there's a lot that you said there. It's powerful stuff. One thought I had is, when people are trying to set these boundaries, and as you mentioned, some folks go no contact, and there is a lot of stigma around that. And like you said, it's boundaries are hard, but then to go completely no contact is 10 times more difficult. What do you do when you're doing what you can for yourself? Like, so usually the no contact and the boundaries are to help protect yourself. There's some self-preservation there. But then you have these strong feelings of empathy or sympathy toward your parent because you know that they're not doing this to be mean. Generally, sometimes you do have very abusive parents, but
Right.
in these situations, it's just that they are maybe not healed and they're passing down bad habits and whatnot. And so when you look at them and say, I understand why they're doing this, I understand it's because of the way they were raised or that because they were abused. And so it doesn't minimize what your feelings are, but there's this level of empathy towards them. And so I want to go no contact because I know that this relationship is really harmful to me. There's this but again, but I feel bad because I
Mhm.
know that they're not doing it to be hurtful. It's because they're hurt themselves. How do you justify or balance those feelings? Because you want to take care of yourself and want to be protective of them, but sometimes you can't do both. So how do you help folks in there where that and doesn't really work?
Yeah, I think that's when you go into we can have multiple feelings at once about the same thing. And so there might be parts of us that still really crave that connection. And how could we not? We are social beings. The kind of creature we are, we depend on adults when we're young, right? We're not the kind of animal that is born and is independent. So there's that natural instinct to be attached. So there might be parts of us that still want to be connected, and that's natural. That's normal. And there are parts of us that know the harm that would be done by being attached and being connected. So there's a need to validate all of it because sometimes what I see is that some individuals want to only acknowledge one side. So maybe they only want to acknowledge that it's harmful. But then there's still that part that's like, but I would still want to have a relationship with them. And when we don't address that or we don't give space for that, that feeling lingers. When we don't give space for our feelings find a way to keep coming up and keep being felt. So I think there's just a need to make space for all of it. And that it might be confusing and that it's complex because as humans, we're complex. I think sometimes drawing it out can be helpful. So whether it's drawing out a picture that represents how you're feeling or mapping it out, these are the different feelings and this is why, and the thoughts underneath them and the beliefs underneath them. I work with a lot of creative patients. So patients find a way to really symbolize and represent how they're feeling. But again, it's just not simplifying too much and making space for all of it. The more that we feel, the more that we can heal. So by suppressing or by ignoring, or even by sometimes we invalidate ourselves, by doing that, we're making things harder for ourselves.
Yeah, that so for people who are not used to feeling and used to stuffing things down and being it under the rug, How do you advise folks to start feeling? Because it seems really obvious and easy, but
Mhm.
when you're somebody who, as soon as you hear to feel something, you're like, nope, distract myself, gonna keep busy, gonna do. How do you feel? It's gonna sound really silly, but how do you feel, Ashley? Like, how do people start to feel and acknowledge those feelings?
Sometimes feelings can be really scary or threatening or intimidating. So, for those clients that don't have that one emotional vocabulary, this is something we would do with like child's patience of just labeling. And for adults, sometimes that basic emotional vocab of what is this feeling? Like, how would I label that? A feeling wheel might be helpful. But I think if it's too scary, sometimes there are ways to do it that are a little more distant. So, I like to use music. So, maybe play a song that represents how you're feeling today, and music is so therapeutic. So then a client will choose, a song, and then maybe I will try to offer three feelings that it could be, and see if they can identify it that way. Things like that, I think, can help so that it doesn't feel so personal. Also, sometimes if you don't have the vocab, then what are you noticing in your body? Are you noticing, a lot of tension? You noticing your heart racing? Okay, and then we can go backwards and, well, what feelings typically are related to that? Maybe you're feeling really angry, or maybe you're feeling nervous, or maybe you're, and then I'll do a lot of maybe so that they have a chance to correct me. No, that's not how I'm feeling. Awesome, now we know. So there's a lot of trial and error in that way, and going at someone's pace. If you try to go too fast, it is too overwhelming and you may lose the client. So it's meeting them where they're at, sometimes making it more playful or making it more abstract. And then from there, practicing, identifying the feelings as they come up.
I was thinking your musical knowledge must be pretty vast if people are giving you songs. Or do you pull them up in the session and listen to it to say, okay, what is this vibe that I'm getting from this?
Yeah, and it's so funny because then the song is always associated with that client. So I had a teen client that would always start sessions with a song, and now I hear certain songs and I think of that client. So it's like a gift in that way.
It's neat though, because like you said, music is very therapeutic and it's a really great tool or resource for folks who maybe aren't as, like you said, as comfortable. Are there other tools or things for folks to get back to the basics to really get in touch with themselves if they're not comfortable with it, not familiar with it, just not really sure how to start? Do you have other tools that you would suggest for folks?
I love journaling. There's something so therapeutic and non-judgmental with journaling because the journal's not going to respond. So you can just put down however you're feeling. And I teach people too, there's so many different ways to journal, because what I get a lot from clients is they're not doing it the right way, but there isn't one way. Some people may just thought dump whatever comes to mind. There's no organization, just write down everything. Others need a prompt. So, anyways, I love to journal. I also love like getting a sense of what that person used to enjoy, especially as a child. Like if I'm doing inner child's work, what are the things that you used to enjoy and can you introduce more of that? Art in particular, I think, is a way that a lot of people express themselves that doesn't require words, right? And a lot of people end up sharing a lot through art. So whether it's, drawing, painting, dancing, a lot of times people become a lot more expressive through art. And maybe this is just because I personally love nature. It's also like getting out there, going outside, being in nature. There's something so healing about that. And we get a lot of insight by being in nature too. So some of those small things of doing things that you used to enjoy, being in nature, using art sometimes can help people. And then it's a matter of auditing your energy. How do you feel after you did that? Can you bring more of that into your routine if you have a routine? I also work with clients that are not routine, and that's okay too. But how can we make sure that you are doing things that you enjoy, that you are doing things that bring life to you? Because so often the individuals I work with prioritize everyone else and they take care of everyone else. I work with a lot of caretakers. And so then it's how can you do something for yourself for 5 minutes or a really, really short amount of time to take care of yourself? And then what did that feel like? And when you're doing those caretaking activities, what did that feel like? And what was your energy like after that? And by auditing your energy, a lot of times clients decide on their own, okay, maybe I need to do less of this and more of that. And they can introduce more pleasure, more joy, more rest. It's another thing I work with clients on, like resting. And there's so many different ways to rest as well.
I love all of that. And I agree that one thing you were talking about was your inner child and getting in touch with that. As we, even if it's without generational trauma, just as adults, we tend to shut down those parts, so the creative parts, the silly parts, because we've got to go to work and we've got to pay bills and we've got to do
Mhm.
adult things. And we lose a lot of the joy and the stuff that made childhood so much more exciting and wonderful. And honestly, it took me a while to get back in touch with mine because I didn't realize how much I had kind of shut it down. But after I had stepped away from my career, I realized I didn't have any hobbies because I worked so much. It was work and then just normal home stuff. And I was like, I don't really have any hobbies. I don't really have any like interests. And so I started getting into things like painting, but dancing and singing and stuff like that that gets in touch with your emotions and your inner self. It's it's stuff that we don't really do, but I think that's really helpful for folks to be able to figure out, what do I want to do more of? I really hated that. Okay, I won't do more of that.
Right.
Even if it's trial by elimination, try
Mhm.
different things and say, you know what? Didn't really like that. Felt kind of cringy. Okay, won't do it again, but I
Right.
really enjoyed doing this, or I laughed so hard when I was doing that. Okay, do more of those things. So I love that piece of getting in touch with you. Generational trauma or not, just blanket advice for everybody is just get back in touch with you and your inner child and find things that bring joy because that makes everything else just so much better. But yeah, other kind of advice or tips or things that you would want to make sure that people know or maybe even just be aware of. One thing I'm still thinking is if people are listening and they're like, yeah, it's interesting, but maybe still aren't recognizing that this is them.
Mm.
Do you have other things to help people realize or pinpoint what generational trauma might be or what it looks like, and how do they recognize it?
Sometimes when things are normal to us, we don't realize that it's abnormal or unhealthy. So, one thing that I like to do, I'm very family oriented, maybe because I'm Latina, I don't know. But I love to do like family maps or family trees or activities like that where you broaden out from just you and look at the whole family. And there are different ways to do this, there's no right or wrong, but you can look at different relationships and who do you feel most connected with, who do you feel least connected with, were there any big conflicts between different family members, what coping strategies did they typically have, what was their reputation like in the family. And by visually seeing it, I think sometimes we identify patterns that are unhealthy. So by doing some kind of family audits or like a visual representation of your family, I think sometimes that's a way you can identify it. I think also it's a matter of if somebody hasn't identified it, I'm wondering if they aren't ready. And also recognizing that too, that it may be too soon for them, or it may be too threatening for them to acknowledge that just yet. And that's okay. So maybe it's just more connecting with yourself, spending more time with yourself, and seeing when somebody is ready to go there. I really do believe in like meeting people where they're at. So there's also that piece. But if somebody is curious and they're like, oh, some of this is resonating, but I don't know, I would really recommend thinking about your family as much as you know. Like to track 3 generations if possible. I know people sometimes don't have that information. As much information as you have, just writing it down, I think visually you'll sort of see some patterns there.
Okay, no, I think that's really good advice. This is all super, super helpful information, Ashley, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about it. But if somebody is interested and wants to look into it or work with you, how can they get in touch with you and find out more?
Sure. So the easiest way to stay connected with me and to see what I'm offering is by connecting with me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is PathBreak Coaching and Consulting. And in my bio, you have the link to my ebooks and my coaching programs.
Awesome. I would definitely link all of that in the show notes. And just as I mentioned, the one workbook that you had sent, I thought was extremely insightful of making an assessment of where you are and how you line up with things. And then to say, okay, is this something that I want to address? And then if so, what are my strategies going forward? And I think you would be a really great resource for folks who are looking to navigate that because some people, your family might be very open to it. And I would imagine that's probably not as common. But if not, I imagine that most people are going to be a little bit more closed off. So you have to do this work solo, but maybe with help of a professional because it's deeply rooted and it's very personal and it's very emotional. And I think it helps to have somebody who can help you, like you mentioned, self validate and have these tools and resources to navigate that and move forward when you're not getting the validation and support and maybe the alignment and the accountability within the family. And so I think what you do is fantastic and very needed, especially in today's world. You and I mentioned when we talked before, the invention of the internet and just how much more people are posting. This seems
Hmm.
like it's a much more common topic in the last, I would say I've started hearing about it maybe within the last few years. Now people have more exposure to things and other people and these conversations. And so it's making it more prominent. And if you have any thoughts about that or want to share anything, I'd love to give you that space to do that.
Yeah, well, to begin, the workbook you're mentioning is called the Roots to Resilience ebook. And it's actually my favorite out of all of them because I just think it really represents all of the work that I typically do with clients. And it's very beginner friendly. It's a mix of like information and activities. So that's the Roots to Resilience toolkit. But I think something else that you're talking to is the importance of chosen family and the need for finding community in this process because a lot of times the individuals are the only one, maybe not the only one, but one of the few in their family or their circle. And I really believe there's a need to connect with other people. And so whether that is in individual therapy or finding those spaces where you find like-minded people, that is so helpful. When I think about those of us that are from the global majority, right? A lot of times we are thought of as minorities, but we're the global majority. We're from collective cultures. We took care of each other. And so the same thing, finding those healing circles, finding maybe therapy groups or whatever it may be for you to not be so alone, I think is really helpful because those individuals receive so much invalidation from others. And so that need to hear that you aren't the only one, it goes along.
Yes, I 100%. Excellent. Well, Ashley, again, thank you so much for coming on today and for sharing this and for sharing some of the resources that you have. And I will post your information in there. So, folks, please take some time to go look up Ashley and her Instagram. And I look forward to staying in touch with you, Ashley. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
All right. And, folks, thanks for listening. And I'll catch you next time on Stumbling Forward.